What if the person who protected you from the world slowly became the one you needed protection from? What if the love you believed was pure and unconditional quietly transformed into something possessive, something controlling, something you couldn't even name at first? This is not a fantasy. This is not a thriller script. This is my life, and it began long before I understood what was happening. My name is Isabel. I'm 20 years old. But to understand how everything fell apart, we need to go back to when I was 8. That was the year my parents decided to separate. One day we were a family, and the next, everything was divided: homes, routines, holidays, even love. My father, a successful Parisian businessman in the luxury fashion world, became someone I saw occasionally instead of daily. He was always well-dressed, always composed, always busy. After the divorce, he became more distant, though never unkind. My mother moved on quickly. She fell in love with a baker named Pierre from the Geneva region. Pierre was a decent man, responsible, structured, disciplined. We moved into his small 2-room apartment in a pale stone building near the canal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Still, I never felt like it truly belonged to me. Pierre believed in rules, clear rules: no short skirts, no bold makeup, no late nights, no improper behavior. I wasn't mistreated, but I was constantly monitored. I had no private space. My mother and I shared one bedroom, while Pierre had the other. I watched my classmates talk about decorating their rooms, blasting music, trying on clothes in front of mirrors without being judged. I smiled along, but inside I felt like a visitor in my own adolescence. By the time I turned 15, the tension between my parents had intensified. My father insisted that I move to Paris to live with him. He argued that I deserved better opportunities, better schools, more freedom. My mother resisted. There were long arguments, tears, painful accusations, but eventually, she agreed. The day I left felt like stepping into a different life. My father lived in a spacious apartment in Paris's 16th arrondissement. High ceilings, polished wooden floors that creaked softly under each step, large windows that flooded the rooms with light. His fashion showroom reflected his success: tailored suits, fine fabrics, everything precise and refined. When he opened the door to what would be my bedroom, I couldn't believe it. The room was enormous compared to anything I had known. Sunlight poured through tall windows that opened onto a small balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard filled with wisteria. Navy velvet curtains framed the space. Posters of my favorite French rock bands hung neatly on the walls. On the nightstand sat a sleek laptop. The colors matched exactly what I loved. It felt personal, intentional. For the first time, I felt chosen. My father's partner at the time, Sylvie, was gentle and reserved. She was a fashion designer with soft features and careful movements. She had no children, and she treated me with warmth that felt sincere. She cooked dishes I loved and helped me with homework. Sometimes I noticed a quiet sadness in her eyes, as if she carried loneliness she never spoke about. I felt sympathy for her. We formed a quiet understanding. 2 years later, everything shifted again. Sylvie became gravely ill. My father spared no effort. He hired the best specialists, arranged private consultations, did everything within his power. But it wasn't enough. She passed away, leaving behind a silence that filled the entire apartment. I was 17. I watched my father grieve, though he did so quietly. He didn't collapse, he didn't scream. He simply became more inward, more focused. I decided to step up. I managed the household. I cooked meals, cleaned, did laundry. I told myself I was helping him heal. I believed I was strong. I believed I was mature. When my mother visited and suggested I move back with her, saying Pierre had softened and that we could live peacefully, I refused without hesitation. Paris felt like freedom, and more than that, I felt responsible for my father. He told my mother clearly that I would stay. I saw pride in his eyes when he said it. Years passed quickly. I turned 20. I had grown into a confident young woman. I received attention from men. Suitors would come by, polite and hopeful. But every time, my father's reaction was the same cold politeness followed by subtle rejection. He never shouted. He never caused a scene. He simply made them uncomfortable enough that they stopped returning. He would tell me I was too young to think about marriage, that I should enjoy my independence, that men would only distract me from my future. One evening, after another relationship quietly faded, I finally asked him directly, "Why do you push everyone away? Don't you want me to have my own life?" He paused longer than usual, then he said softly, "I don't know how I would live without you. You're my only joy." His words touched me deeply. I felt important, needed. I reassured him. I promised that even if I married someday, I would never abandon him. I even told him he could live with me and my future husband if he wanted. He smiled at that. But his smile lingered in a way that made me uneasy. After that conversation, our closeness intensified. We dined together more often. He invited me to events, bought me elegant dresses, expensive jewelry, beautiful accessories from brands like Dior. He told me constantly that I was beautiful, intelligent, exceptional. Under his attention, I flourished. And then one ordinary afternoon, while cleaning his bedroom, I noticed something small but unsettling near his bed, a bottle of men's cream he usually kept hidden. I recognized what it was for. I told myself it was normal. He was an adult man, he had private needs. That evening, I carefully suggested that he deserved companionship, that he could find someone new, that he didn't have to be alone forever. His reaction was immediate and sharp. "Why are you going through my things?" he asked, offended. I tried to explain that I was an adult now, that I only wanted him to be happy. He looked directly at me and said quietly, firmly, "I am happy with you." In that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it. And that was the beginning of everything. I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood him. That when he said he was happy with me, he meant it in the way any father would. Protective, attached, grateful. I repeated those explanations in my mind like a shield. But a few days later, that shield cracked. He called me into his bedroom one evening. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I remember walking down the hallway, telling myself not to overthink it. When I entered, he was sitting on the edge of his bed. He gestured for me to sit beside him. I did. He sat close. Closer than usual. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of my blouse. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face as if he were memorizing it. "Isabel," he said softly, "you've grown into such a beautiful young woman." I smiled awkwardly. Compliments from him were normal. He had always told me I was smart, graceful, special, but this felt different. His tone was slower. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from my face. The gesture seemed innocent at first, tender. "I want to protect you from everyone," he continued. "The world is dangerous, men are selfish, they don't deserve you." His hand lingered in my hair. Then it moved down, resting lightly on my shoulder. My body stiffened, though I didn't pull away. I didn't know why. Maybe because he was my father. Maybe because I trusted him. He leaned closer and wrapped his arms around me. At first, it felt like a familiar embrace. I had hugged him 1,000 times before. But this time, he held me longer, tighter. I could feel his breathing change. I could feel the weight of his body pressing against mine. "I'm sorry if I've been strict," he murmured near my ear. "I was just afraid of losing you." His hand began to move slowly along my back, then lower. My heart started racing. Something inside me screamed that this was wrong, but another part of me felt frozen, unable to react. When his hand crossed a boundary it never should have crossed, My breath caught in my throat. I should have stood up. I should have shouted. I should have left the room, but I didn't. He began kissing my hair, my temple, then my neck. Not like a father comforting his daughter, like a man claiming a woman. My thoughts blurred. I felt fear, confusion, disbelief. And alongside it, something even more disturbing, a strange warmth I didn't want to acknowledge. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice thick. "I don't want you to leave me. I don't want you to belong to anyone else. You're mine." Mine. The word echoed in my mind. I felt his hands tighten around me. He lifted me gently and laid me back onto the bed. He looked at me in a way I had never seen before, intense, burning, possessive. I was terrified. But I was also paralyzed. He leaned down again, his lips brushing against my skin. I closed my eyes. I couldn't process what was happening. It felt unreal, like I had stepped outside of myself. I wasn't Isabel anymore. I was just a body, frozen under his gaze. And then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in my own bed. Moonlight filtered through the navy curtains. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I had been running. I was drenched in sweat. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But when I stood up and looked in the mirror, I saw the truth. My hair was tangled, my eyes were red and swollen, and on my neck, there was a faint mark. I touched it with trembling fingers. The memory returned in flashes. His warmth. His breath. His voice whispering that I belonged to him. That I was his property. Property. I felt sick. I took a long shower, scrubbing my skin as if I could erase the memory. I changed into my satin pajamas and sat on my bed, staring at the wall. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that maybe I had exaggerated what happened, but my body remembered. The next morning, I forced myself to leave my room. I couldn't hide forever. When I entered the kitchen, he was sitting at the table drinking coffee, looking as composed as always, handsome, calm, controlled. He smiled when he saw me. "Good morning, my little Isabel. Did you sleep well?" His voice was warm, almost playful, as if nothing had happened. I nodded silently. He stood, walked toward me, and kissed my forehead. The gesture felt normal on the surface, but my body reacted instantly. I felt tension rise through me. "Forgive me," he said softly. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just can't live without you." He wrapped his arms around my waist again. This time, I didn't resist. I didn't know how. I felt trapped between fear and a twisted sense of loyalty. That evening, he told me to wear the red dress he had bought me. The silk one. The one that was more daring than anything I had ever worn. "We'll go to dinner," he said casually. "Just us." I wanted to say no, but I didn't. I put on the dress. It hugged my body in ways that made me uncomfortable. I looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the girl staring back. I looked older, different. When I stepped into the living room, he was waiting in a tailored suit from Dior, perfectly fitted, perfectly styled. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "My little Isabel," he said slowly, "you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen." And in that moment, standing there in red silk under his gaze, I felt the invisible cage close just a little tighter. That night should have felt special. We dined high above the city at a refined restaurant inside the Eiffel Tower, the lights of Paris glowing beneath us like a sea of stars. From the outside, we looked like a proud father celebrating his daughter. He was attentive, charming, telling stories that made me laugh. He ordered the finest dishes, poured wine carefully into my glass, and never stopped watching me. Anyone observing us would have seen elegance, closeness, even admiration. What they would not have seen was the quiet shift happening inside me. For a few hours, I allowed myself to forget. I told myself I had overreacted. I told myself nothing truly inappropriate had happened. I focused on the warmth of the restaurant, the hum of conversation around us, the way he smiled when I complimented the food. I wanted normal, I needed normal. When we returned home, that illusion dissolved. He put on a film in the living room, something light and romantic, and sat close beside me on the sofa. At first, his arm rested casually along the back cushion, then it lowered, wrapping around my waist. I felt his breath against my hair. "You're mine," he whispered softly, as if repeating a promise. "You belong with me." I should have stood up. I should have left the room, but I stayed. He turned toward me and kissed me. Not a father's gentle kiss on the forehead, not affection. It was deliberate, slow, intentional. I tasted coffee and tobacco on his lips. My head spun. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I didn't push him away. That is the part that haunted me most. I didn't resist. He pulled back and looked into my eyes with an expression that blended tenderness and possession. "I'll never let anyone take you from me," he said. And from that night forward, everything changed completely. Our relationship crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. We spent nearly all our time together. He began discouraging me from seeing friends. If someone called, he would find a reason for me not to go. If a man showed interest, he would subtly interfere until that person disappeared. He surrounded me with luxury. Designer dresses, high heels, jewelry from Cartier, and Van Cleef and Arpels. He said I had to look extraordinary, because I was extraordinary. He told me no one else deserved to see me the way he did. One afternoon, he handed me a box. Inside was black lace lingerie, delicate and revealing. I had never worn anything like it before. I hesitated, embarrassed. "Trust me," he said calmly, "you're perfect." I went into my room and changed. When I stepped back out, his eyes darkened with approval. He looked at me not as a father looks at a daughter, but as a man assessing something he owns. "You're a goddess," he said. His praise felt intoxicating. I felt desired, powerful, and deeply ashamed. I knew it was wrong. Every rational thought in my mind told me this was not love, it was not protection, it was not normal, but emotion is not rational. He had built himself into the center of my world. I depended on him for validation, affection, stability. He isolated me slowly, carefully, until he was the only voice I truly heard. I became addicted to his attention, to the way he looked at me, to the intensity of his focus. I hated myself for it, yet I craved it. One evening, lying beside him, I asked quietly, "What would happen if Mom found out?" His expression hardened instantly. "If she tries to interfere," he said coldly, "I'll destroy her life. No one comes between us." There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just certainty. I felt fear grip my chest, but I hid it. I wrapped my arms around him and said the words he wanted to hear. "I love you." He smiled, satisfied. "I love you too, my little Isabel." Months passed like this. I stopped calling friends. I lost interest in my studies. My world shrank to the size of our apartment. On the surface, I looked like a young woman living in luxury. Inside, I was disappearing. And then one day, while he was at work, I made a discovery that shattered whatever illusion remained. I was cleaning his room when I found a small locked metal box tucked behind books on a shelf. I knew I shouldn't open it, but something compelled me. I searched his desk until I found a small key. Inside the box were photographs, dozens of them, photos of me. Some taken from a distance, some clearly captured without my knowledge, different outfits, different moments. Even pictures taken when I thought I was alone. My hands began to shake. Beneath the photos was a folded note. I opened it and read the words slowly. "My little Isabel, you are mine. No one will take you from me. I am ready to do anything for you. Anything. Anything." A chill ran through me. This was no longer blurred by confusion or twisted affection. This was obsession. I carefully put everything back exactly as I found it. For the first time, clarity pierced through the fog. This was not love. This was captivity disguised as devotion. And I knew one thing with certainty: if I didn't leave soon, I might never leave at all. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, staring at the door, listening to every sound in the apartment. The photographs kept replaying in my mind, the note, the word anything. For the first time, I stopped seeing him as a protective father who had gone too far. I saw him clearly as a man who believed he owned me. And ownership is not love. The next morning, when he left for work, I didn't hesitate. I packed quickly and quietly. I took only what mattered: my documents, some cash, a few clothes, my phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was steady. If I stayed, I would disappear completely. If I left, at least I had a chance. When I stepped out of the apartment, the Paris air felt different. Lighter. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. Every passing car made me flinch. Every tall man in a dark coat made my heart race. I felt like a fugitive. At the train station, I didn't overthink it. I bought a ticket for the first departure available. It was heading to Marseille. I didn't know anyone there. I had never lived there. But distance was all that mattered. As the train pulled away from Paris, I watched the city fade behind me. The buildings, the streets, the life I had known all shrinking until they disappeared. Fields replaced concrete. Lavender and pine forests blurred past the window. I felt empty, but also strangely calm. I had chosen myself for the first time. In Marseille, I rented a small room in a modest youth hostel near the old port. It wasn't luxurious. The walls were thin, the bed was small, but when I locked the door at night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. I found work as a waitress in a small cafe in the Cours Julien district, a lively neighborhood filled with artists, students, and narrow, colorful streets. The job was simple, tiring, honest. No one knew my past. No one watched me with possessive eyes. I was just Isabelle, a girl trying to build a new life. 6 months passed. Slowly, I began to breathe again. That's when I met Julien. He was studying architecture at the National School of Architecture of Marseille, and worked evenings as a bartender to pay his tuition. He wasn't wealthy, he didn't wear tailored suits, he didn't speak in grand promises. He was kind, calm, respectful. When he looked at me, I didn't feel owned, I felt seen. We started talking after his shifts, then we started walking home together, then we started dating. With him, everything felt different. He never tried to control me. He encouraged me to reconnect with people, to study again, to rebuild confidence. When I told him I sometimes struggled with trust, he didn't pressure me for explanations. He simply waited. For the first time, love felt safe. One evening, at a small seafood restaurant by the port, with the sound of boats shifting gently in the water behind us, he took my hand and proposed. His voice trembled slightly. Mine did too when I said yes. I cried, not from fear, not from confusion, but from hope. We began planning our wedding. I chose a simple lace gown with a modest train. Nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic, just something pure. Julien bought elegant white gold rings. We talked about renting a small apartment together, maybe traveling someday, maybe starting a family. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe the nightmare was behind me. I had changed my number. I had blocked every contact connected to my father. I had left no trace of my location. I thought I had escaped. On the morning of my wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my small room, adjusting my dress. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from excitement. I smiled at my reflection. And then I saw him, standing in the doorway. His reflection appeared behind mine. My body froze before my mind could react. He looked exactly the same, perfectly dressed, calm, controlled, but his eyes burned with something familiar and terrifying. "My little Isabel," he said quietly, as if greeting me after a short trip. "Did you really think you could escape?" The room felt smaller instantly, the air heavier. I couldn't speak. He stepped closer. "You thought you could marry someone else? You belong to me." My heart pounded so hard I thought I would faint. I tried to step back, but my legs felt weak. He grabbed my wrist. "Come," he said firmly. "We're going back to Paris." I resisted. I told him no. I tried to pull free, but he was stronger. He dragged me outside before I could scream, before anyone could understand what was happening. People glanced at us, assuming it was a family argument. He forced me into his car, a large black German sedan, and drove away. As Marseille disappeared behind us, I realized something devastating. I had escaped once, but he had never truly let me go. And as the highway stretched ahead, I knew I was being pulled back into the cage I had fought so hard to leave. The drive back to Paris felt endless. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past, feeling that same suffocating helplessness return. 6 months of freedom vanished in a single afternoon. My wedding dress was still on my body. My veil lay crumpled beside me on the seat. I looked like a bride, but I felt like a hostage. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. That was the most disturbing part. He drove calmly, one hand on the wheel, as if this were a simple trip, as if he were correcting a small mistake. "You shouldn't have tried to run," he said at one point, his voice controlled. "You forced me to take action." Forced him. Even then, he positioned himself as the victim. When we reached the apartment in Paris, everything looked exactly the same. The polished floors, the tall windows, the heavy navy curtains in my old bedroom. It felt frozen in time, as if I had never left. He locked the door behind us. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in my chest. He lifted me in his arms and carried me to the bedroom. I struggled, but my strength was nothing compared to his. He laid me on the bed and stood over me, looking down as if inspecting something that belonged to him. "My little Isabel," he said quietly, "you disappointed me." I began to cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears sliding down my face. I thought of Julian waiting at the ceremony. I imagined the guests whispering, confused. I imagined the empty chair, where I should have been. He leaned down and began kissing me again, the way he always had, possessive, claiming, deliberate. His hands pulled at my wedding dress, loosening the lace, dragging the fabric from my shoulders. The sound of tearing cloth filled the room. "You are mine," he whispered. "You will always be mine." I felt something inside me break. Not just fear. Not just resistance. Hope. He kissed my neck, my collarbone, leaving marks as if stamping ownership. "You will never escape again," he murmured. "No one will take you from me." And then, suddenly, there was noise outside the apartment. A voice. "Isabel, Isabel." Julian. My heart jumped violently. He had followed us. Somehow, he had found us. "Open the door," Julian shouted from the hallway. "Isabel, we're getting married today, please." My father froze for a moment, then a cold smile spread across his face. "You chose the wrong man," he said calmly. He stood up and walked toward the front door. I could hear Julian pleading, knocking harder, his voice desperate. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled. I heard the door open slightly. Then my father's voice, low and threatening. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. "She doesn't want you." There was a pause. Then the door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He returned to the bedroom, his expression darker now, determined, controlled. "I warned you," he said. In that moment, clarity flooded my mind completely. This was not excessive love. This was not protection. This was obsession. He had isolated me, manipulated me, claimed me, and now he was willing to destroy my future to keep me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. He placed it slowly on the bedside table, deliberately, so I could see it. "You will never leave me again," he said softly. "No one will save you." My entire body went cold. I stared at the weapon, then at him, then back at the weapon. He wasn't bluffing. I knew that now. The note in the metal box had been real. The threat about my mother had been real. He was ready to go further than I had ever imagined. "Even if I have to kill," he added quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. I realized something important then. For years, I had believed I was powerless, that I was under his control, that I belonged to him. But looking at that gun, I understood something else. He was afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of losing ownership. Afraid of losing the illusion he had built around us. And fear makes people dangerous. He picked up the gun and held it loosely in his hand, smiling at me as if this was some twisted lesson. "Now you understand," he said. "We can never be separated." My tears stopped, not because I wasn't scared, but because something inside me shifted again. I had escaped once, and if there was even the smallest chance to do it again, I would take it. Because this time, it wasn't just about freedom. It was about survival. He raised the gun slowly, almost casually, as if the weight of it meant nothing. But to me, it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to that single object in his hand. The man standing in front of me was no longer the father who bought me velvet curtains and rock band posters. He was no longer the grieving widower who said I was his only joy. He was a man cornered by his own obsession. "You see now," he said calmly, the weapon resting between his fingers, "we belong together, no one else." My tears had stopped. My fear was still there, sharp and cold, but something stronger began to rise beneath it: clarity. For years, I had confused control with devotion. I had mistaken isolation for intimacy. I had allowed his possessiveness to feel like protection. But staring at that gun, there was no confusion left. This was not love. This was captivity. He stepped closer, the mattress dipping as he leaned toward me. "I would rather destroy everything than lose you," he whispered. And that was the moment I understood something critical. He didn't love me. He loved ownership. He loved dominance. He loved the version of me that revolved entirely around him. But I was no longer that girl. Outside the apartment door, I could still hear faint movement in the hallway, murmurs, distant footsteps. Julian hadn't given up easily, and that gave me strength. I wasn't as alone as he wanted me to believe. My father's attention shifted for a brief second toward the noise. That second was enough. I moved. Not dramatically, not heroically, just fast and precise. I grabbed the heavy bedside lamp and swung it toward his wrist with every ounce of strength I had left. The gun slipped from his hand and crashed onto the floor, sliding beneath the edge of the bed. He shouted in shock more than pain. I didn't wait. I ran. Barefoot, wedding dress torn, hair undone, I ran toward the front door. He tried to grab me, but the surprise had slowed him down. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and pulled it open. Julian was still there. When he saw me crying, disheveled, terrified, his expression changed instantly from confusion to understanding. Behind me, my father shouted my name. Not angrily, desperately. "My little Isabel, don't do this." But I was already stepping away from him. Neighbors had begun to gather in the hallway, drawn by the noise. Someone had called the police. I could hear sirens approaching in the distance. The illusion he had carefully built for years was collapsing in real time. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not powerful, not dominant. Afraid. Police officers arrived within minutes. Questions were asked. Voices were raised. The gun was found under the bed. The photographs in the metal box were discovered later that night. He tried to explain. He tried to twist the story, but evidence doesn't bend easily. As they led him away, he looked at me not with rage, but with disbelief. As if he couldn't understand how his property, had developed a will of her own. I didn't look away this time. Months passed after that day. There were statements, investigations, courtrooms. I had to speak about things I never wanted to relive. It wasn't easy. Some days I doubted myself. Some days I felt shame trying to creep back in. But shame belongs to the guilty, not to the survivor. Julian stayed, patient, steady. He never pressured me to be normal again. He understood that healing is not linear. We postponed the wedding, we rebuilt slowly, carefully, on equal ground. I reconnected with my mother. For the first time, I told her everything. It broke her heart, but it also freed us both from years of silence. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a reflection shaped by someone else's control. I see a woman who learned the difference between love and possession, between protection and imprisonment. If there is one thing I want you to understand from my story, it's this: control disguised as affection is still control. Isolation disguised as devotion is still isolation. And no matter how powerful someone seems, no one owns you. Not your parent, not your partner, not anyone. If you ever find yourself questioning whether something feels wrong, listen to that instinct. Speak, reach out, run if you have to. Freedom may feel terrifying at first, but it is always worth choosing. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it helped you see something more clearly, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes, the first step to breaking a prison is simply realizing that you're inside one.